Welcome everyone. My name is Inga and I am communication researcher at Riga Spriņģe University. And you are listening to Media and Society podcast. In our episodes, we will provide a platform for in-depth conversations about the ways people experience, feel and think about media and journalism. Aimed at media professionals and media scholars, the podcast explores the multifaceted relationships between media, journalism and audiences in two Baltic countries, Latvia and Estonia. Episode 1. What it's like to be a journalist in Latvia and Estonia. This is our first episode and it's my pleasure to invite for a talk two wonderful guests. A transnational journalist couple, Inga Spriņģe, award-winning Latvian journalist and founder of the Baltic Center for Investigative Journalism, Rebaltica, and Holger Roonemaa, also award-winning Estonian investigative journalist and editor, team lead of investigative journalists at Delfi news site in Estonia. Welcome, both.
Hi.
Hi.
Professionally, you are two journalists with roots in either Latvia or Estonia. At the same time, you are also life partners, which makes me assume that most probably it doesn't go unnoticed that what it is like to be a journalist in Latvia or Estonia. How would you describe what it is like to be a journalist in Latvia or in Estonia nowadays?
So maybe I can actually start telling how it is to be a journalist in Estonia. I am actually envious to Estonian journalism because size-wise, Estonia is much smaller, but media consumption-wise, it's much stronger. And it proves that actually the size doesn't matter always so much. Even if there are by an amount less readers or viewers, still Estonian media has more trust by the audience. While comparing to Latvia, it's much smaller. I always have a pain when we publish some international cooperations. And then I measure how much my stories were viewed on leading Latvian websites and how much the same Holger's or his colleagues on Estonian. And the numbers always in Estonia are 3 or 4 times more. So it's the proof that Estonian media are much better regarded.
Well, yes, we do compare the numbers occasionally. And in that sense, that's correct that we can see that our stories in general, or on average, let's say, reach a wider part of the Estonian society, which means that to answer your question, how is it to be a journalist in Estonia? How does it feel to be an investigative journalist in Estonia? It feels quite okay, actually. Now, for the last 6 or 7 years, it almost feels like working in a startup. It's the same company that I'm working now again for the last 4 or 5 years running. And it really does feel like a startup, especially the 2, 3, 4 years ago, the growth numbers that we had online as well for digital subscribers. Like every week you were like breaking records, which means that luckily, Estonian society has understood the relevance of why they need to subscribe, why they need to pay digitally to be able to read in-depth original reporting and journalism. And yes, at Delfi, we now have somewhere around 105,000, maybe a little bit more, people who pay just to read our stories on Delfi, which means that we feel quite comfortable that we're not just lone voice in a desert, but actually we can see that our work makes an impact.
You mentioned this sense of startup. Inga, how do you feel about the situation in Latvia? Most probably you have a little bit different sense because you work in like journalism NGO, not like mainstream media organization.
If I look from two perspectives, from one like general one, I still feel like we are in this thinking ship. I don't feel in Latvian journalism this kind of startup vibe. Again, by comparing numbers, how many people read our stories and how many people read in Estonia. If we talk about like non-profit, especially Rebaltica, we can't complain. We have trust from our community. Yes, we are also one of the hated media, I assume, in Latvia. But in general, it's harder for Latvian media, and it comes together like from all aspects, because we see that also there is less trust to government institutions. We are more negative, we are more pessimist, so we don't trust to anyone. We don't trust to media, to government, to healthcare institutions, and so on. So it goes hand to hand. While in Estonia, I know public broadcaster also has much higher viewership numbers like in Latvia, for example.
Holger, you mentioned that Estonians have understood the role of media and appreciate your work. But how do you feel? What is your professional role nowadays and what audience expects from journalists in Estonia? And then afterwards, Inga, you can maybe speak about Latvians.
It's a very difficult question, actually. As an investigative journalist, I think it's quite clear for me that I know what the audience expects, and I also know what the editor-in-chief expects from our team. And it is still to uncover things that have not been uncovered, and that are serious, important, and what the general public should be aware of. Are we talking about Russian influence and such things? Are we talking about corruption? About hidden or not so clearly defined problems in the society. So that's the kind of work that we are doing. But in general, I think that the expectations for media, for journalists in Estonia are pretty much connected to scrutinize the authorities, but to be the one doing the checks.
I can then take and continue what the audience expects from us. And I think in Latvia especially, we can feel it. We have been taught at universities that we are journalists, we should be neutral, we just report about things. But what I can feel now, people actually want us to make changes. They want solutions. Because there is this kind of this feeling like we are tired of this negative news. We are tired of the wars, of conflicts, of disasters, climate changes. We want some solutions. Tell us what I can do. And recently I read a report what younger generation who will be media consumers in 2030, what they will actually want. This was one of the big aspects. They were saying, we want to do something. So you report, reveals the problem and give us tools, tell us what we can go and do. I don't like to use this positive news. It's something different, but like this solution-based journalism or explanatory journalism. And also like Reuters digital media reports they do on annual basis, it also shows that there is this news fatigue. If we see what people actually want to consume, it's like this explanatory kind of journalism. And I think this is where we will need to go to move. Maybe public broadcaster will stay like, also, of course, you need to cover general news, but especially if you are commercial or some niche media, this is where we will need to move. Because this is also what we see, what people do when they follow on social media. They follow either some kind of practical influencers where you can learn how to, lose weight or become more mindful or how to save money, for example, or where you learn some kind of new things. So I think this is also where journalism should go, because now also with artificial intelligence, there will be more and more noise.
I can agree with you, Inga, here absolutely, that we can sense the news fatigue in Estonia as well. We have been living from one crisis to the next crisis, to the third, fourth, fifth, and I have lost count how many crises in the last 5 years. But we can see that the audience is actually tired. We can see that in connection to hard news stories, for example, that the number of readership on average is getting a little bit lower than it used to. And that's something that we are trying to figure out how to solve. And part of a solution definitely is what Inga was suggesting. But I think there is another challenge as well, that we still need to figure out how to report about the same hard and stress-causing topics so that the audience would still find it not only relevant, but they would also see that this is something that they need to be aware of, and that this is something that they can consume as media consumers. I think that's one of the toughest challenges.
But do you have already some recipe in mind? So what might work? What might help to work in this constructive journalism way?
In general, we need to change some angle how we actually do it.
Holger, what about you? Do you have any new approaches, or your team?
We have in Delphi for sure, but the work of our investigative team is a little bit more specific. I'm afraid that at some stage we are in risk of becoming these old dinosaurs who are doing things the old-fashioned way. We are trying to figure out a little bit innovative ways how to highlight problems.
Sorry, Holger, for interrupting you. I think you need to mention Danske Bank's show.
One of the core scandals in Estonian society over the last 10 years have been the Estonian banks, Estonian registered banks, facilitating money laundering through Estonia. Money laundering, dirty money coming from Russia, Azerbaijan and all similar corrupt countries, and moving from Estonian banks to the other Western financial institutions, ending up in luxury properties, etc. And money laundering is very technical, boring, dry thing, topic, but it's very difficult to write about it in a sexy and engaging way. But it's very, very difficult to actually do it in an engaging way to a local audience. And the more surprised I was last summer when a playwright from Estonian Drama Theatre approached me and then said that they are planning to make the Danske Bank money laundering scandal into a theatre play. And I couldn't imagine it at all. But how would it be possible and why? No one understands about it. Yes, but we allowed the theatre to read some of the documents that we had in our possession that were the basis of our reporting. They came to our office. We spent hours reading the documents, of course, all the stories that we had done and that other journalists, other media in Estonia had done. And now, 2 weeks ago, they premiered it in Tartu as one of the flagship events at the Tartu Capital of Culture 2024 program. And it was a huge event. It was 40 people involved, or 30 actors, I think, something like that. We had a live band of 4 or 5 people doing music that integrated into the story. The story had really well been made humane. They sold out 11 performances, 550 people in the audience in every performance. They sold it out in minutes. Not in days or weeks, but in minutes. And people are writing desperately on Facebook, but how can I get? Someone please help me find a ticket. I need to see it. It's 3.5 hours, really fast pace. A lot of video integrated in there, scene by scene. It runs simultaneously as a theatre performance and basically as a Netflix series. Critics consider it one of the most noteworthy theatrical productions, again, since 2014 probably. So I think that's one of the cases where we see a different way how to reach the audience, because the people who went to see that performance in theatre, they are not most probably the general audience who would come to read our boring, dry money laundering stories. So that's a very, very, very cool example. Thank you, Inga.
I'm still very impressed with this show. I also watched it. And this is why we Baltic actually tried also. We showed our 4 episodes about collusion in society. And we also had this pop-up magazine, as you say, theater. But it was a bit different because we together with actors were telling war stories. So it is again this new kind of ways how to engage your community, reach out to these people and talk about actually. Our goal was more to show that we are also humans and how we are doing our investigations and how we feel when we are working in our job. It's kind of really Holger said very correctly, startup mode. You need to all the time think. Sometimes I'm so tired of
of thinking. Yeah.
I just want to be all dinosaur and just do just journalism, not to think about how we will show it on a TikTok and Instagram and Facebook is shutting down everything and then someone is reporting. And
yeah, but we need to find this kind of creative ways also how to show to the audience, how to illustrate the problems that we're writing about.
How you do storytelling? Is it cinema, it's infographics, it's visuals, it's audio, podcasts or whatever? It's all about storytelling nowadays. And because people have so short attention span, because they are tired of all the time of these old disasters, we need to be creative all the time and think what's actually worth to do and then how to do it.
But then again, is there a limit for your creativity? Because you already mentioned that sometimes you feel so tired just to think of the new ways how to talk about your stories and investigations.
I think creativity is one of the scarcest resources that we actually have. It's very easy to fall into routines, and that I can sense that in our work actually as well, that we need to engage the audience, but if we want to also have a classic impact, we still need to keep that boring part somewhere as well.
I was thinking about this creativity. And sometimes also you need creativity just to make your life more interesting because it's boring, You report about money laundering, all these offshore things and nothing changes. Let's just create something interesting. That's why we had last year in Daugavpils, we made this pop-up editorial where we put our tent in main pedestrian street in the city and we just spoke for a week with the people. Or we do this theater. So it's also, one thing is how to reach audience. Another thing is also how to make life interesting for ourselves.
You already mentioned this news fatigue and also how audience actually reacts to these new approaches, new offers you provide. But overall, what is common and what are other unique patterns in Latvian or in Estonian audiences?
The one thing I was still thinking of myself lately, why there is such a gap that people read much less I can reach with my stories than Holger with his stories from the same project. And one explanation is, I don't know if it's empirical, I haven't checked it, but Latvia media market is more fragmented. Like we have everything fragmented. We have 10 political parties in government, and the same about media as well. In Estonia, you have 3 big news websites and 1 niche. And in Latvia, we have 3 big, then at least 2-3 clickbait websites, and so this audience becomes like much smaller. And recently I did experiment. I did one of my story to both TVNet and Delphi. Usually we have our partner as TVNet. They both published, and on both websites the audience was equal, which shows that it is fragmented, that people who consume Delphi, they only consume Delphi, and people who consume TVNet is TVNet. So when we count together all these websites, maybe I would get half of Estonian reach. But it's about these bubbles and this fragmentation, which is, I don't know, good or bad, but I think it also makes life harder for media because you have less subscribers, you have less money.
The reason why the Estonian audience is so much larger comes down to maybe two factors, or one main factor is that we have 2 large private media companies. One is like so-called Delfi Group, and then the other is so-called Postimees Group. Delfi started combining the newspapers. They were part of the same Express group in total. So Delfi started bringing them their online content to be published like through Delfi or under Delfi, which means that Delfi was able to kind of naturally include original and more in-depth reporting than it would have been possible for Delfi's news team. Because still 15 years ago, 10 years ago, maybe a little bit less, Delfi was doing quite little of original news reporting. But if you had like 3 or 4 newspapers whose job is to do original reporting and you can publish their content, that kind of allowed to build that trust or expectation that yes, it's okay to pay online for a digital subscription as well. And on the other hand, what Postimees was doing, that Postimees had the largest newspaper in Estonia, still has Postimees, maybe it's not the largest anymore, but it also has the local regional newspapers, and then they were able to build that into large online publishing through Postimees. So that's the 2 pillars that brought together the audiences, and then makes the audiences larger in Estonia. But you had that possibility, you had that legacy, good legacy coming from newspapers, and then you were able to turn it into a digital audience. In Latvia's case, in TVNet and Delfi, I think neither of them have any newspaper connection. All reporting that they do has always been original.
And beside all of that, we have also this bad history with the press, what happened with newspaper DNA. And DNS business, which was bought by oligarchs, as we later discovered, which also was this fighting paid articles, bad journalism. It also created this distaste maybe in some part of societies that you cannot trust the media in general.
But you already mentioned trust. How do you think, what are the reasons why there is such rather big distrust in media and in journalism in general?
There are probably, I don't know, a few hundred scientific research papers on that as well. There are so many reasons, starting from the social media platforms, which have dominated for the last 15 years and then have turned into increasing dominance with all their algorithms. When there was this gap that I told you about, this, when people were not willing to pay for online subscriptions for classic media. In the US as well, the Trump peak happened in 2016. Before that, still largely the major newspapers were struggling a lot, and they still are. If you take a look at Washington Post, for example, which has lost 40-50% of its page views, they are making a huge loss. So social media for sure is, I think, there is general this polarization in the society. We can see the rise of populist and far-right parties whose one of their key strategies is to criticize or to make fun of and attack independent media, for example. It's a deliberate way how to cause polarization. Of course, you can always say that it's a question of N versus egg, that which was first, was it the chicken or the egg, that which caused the polarization and so on. But yes, as well from Delfi's perspective, I can say that 10, 15 years ago, for sure, after the financial crisis and during the crisis, when the paper circulation numbers and subscription numbers were falling quickly, we didn't have digital subscribers coming. We also had a journalistic lapse of quality at that time, because when every older, more experienced reporter that you lose who goes out of a business, you need to hire someone straight out of university. Inevitably, be as good as perspective as we are, but inevitably you will still have a period where the quality can't be assured as well. You will not have as good sources. You will not have as good historical memory of things, and you know how it goes. So I think that also left a gap.
I can propose some solutions potential or like where it might go. So one thing already actually we mentioned is changing focus, how we produce storytelling and more like kind of this solution based of stories. Then I think also we as journalists still, I'm talking it about for years to my colleagues, they are pissed off of me. We need to tell more actually how journalism differs from social media or from other information sources. And now I'm stressing professional journalists because people are asking, but neatkarīgā rīta avīze wrote this and that. People who don't know, it's very clickbaity, I would say even far right website in Latvia. And people don't understand what's the difference between like LSM, public broadcaster, on this clickbaity far right news website in Latvia. So we need to explain and educate ourselves. And another thing is we also need to follow this social media trend and show journalistic faces. We need to tell how we work and show our faces. I am subscribing now New York Times, but a long time before I was consuming it only on Instagram. I can see how they are promoting. There are more and more videos about the news stories coming out. There is a court case about Trump, journalist stands in front. It's still like print, so it's not like TV program.
I was left thinking about showing our faces, which is something that we also try to do, but still that Delfi has a very wide audience. More than half of the student population are regular readers of Delfi, but still when we do something really notable, we try to get to our media as well. We like to ask public broadcaster if they would have us on their evening programs or morning programs or radio stations, etc. So we still try to reach as wide audience ourselves as well, and that's the case where reporters going to talk themselves. Sometimes you do an investigation and the more interesting thing is to talk about how you did it, and that's what you will not do in your own story, but maybe what another radio station will ask. But you did that investigation about money laundering. Tell me, how did you actually get the data? How did you get the information? Where did you find the sources? And then you talk as much as possible. Of course, you can't reveal everything. I think it's something that we will continue thinking, and it's again about creativity. And a lot of journalists are very shy, especially people who are in press. They don't like to show their faces or hear their voices. And sometimes we need to take that extra step to push ourselves out of a comfort zone and actually show us more to the audience.
What I feel that this prestige of profession is rather damaged somehow, because even in university we see that potential students, they are not so many anymore as it was like years ago.
I have a good example. Last month we needed to hire a new fact checker, which is a very difficult job. And fact checkers again are some of is the occupation inside journalism, which is publicly like ridiculed, harassed the most. I think so. It's a very tough job. And I have never been a fan of public competitions, but we announced a public competition that we are hiring a new fact checker. And I've never been as amazed by the results. We got 31 applications for the job, and out of those, we invited 8 people to a conversation. And I saw that we would have needed to invite at least 2 more. But like the list went too large, but to have like 10 job interviews was a little bit too much. And the quality of people who applied, it really surprised me. And they were not only people with a journalistic background, but many of them are coming from international relations, history, and so on. I can sense that the prestige of a profession has actually grown quite a lot in Estonia.
Globally now, the profession journalism is like historically low. The trust to media and consumption to media in general is very low. What I'm telling to myself, I'm again going away a bit from your question, but maybe we don't need to reach like huge audience, like at least in Latvia, but if we can reach those people who are the ones who are actually doing things. So maybe in this case, it's not about how many people we reach, but like who we reach. And if this, 500 or 10,000 who read this story, if they are the ones who are active and who are actually changing something, so maybe we need to focus more on work with these people instead of like trying to tell general audience that, you can trust us and we work professionally and deep state or Kariņa Levita regimes is not paying to us. Just need to do your job as good as I can. That's all what I can do.
Don't you think that in Latvia, sometimes those who believe and who trust in media and in professional journalism, they do not step up and they are silent when those couple of very noisy people are telling how bad are journalists?
When Estonia had a previous president, I also liked how she stood up publicly saying, we have like three problems main in Estonia. One was something related to security. It was before war in Ukraine. And another one was domestic violence. And third one, online harassment toward journalists and other public people. I've never heard in Latvia when high-level politician would stood up and say like online harassment is not okay. Instead, I can see that politicians themselves are doing this. Of course, in Estonia as well, politicians are attacking publicly, and it's becoming a cool trend, like how can I say something sharp and rude to journalists? It's very normal. But I don't understand that by doing this, they are also diminishing trust to themselves as well. Because then general people are like, oh, politicians are bad, journalists are bad, everyone is bad. And this is where this news fatigue is growing. Instead of some constructive way of approaching things, we are just disseminating everything is so bad. And in Latvia, I think it has reached some critical level. You go everywhere and everywhere is this huge pessimism. We don't believe, we don't trust each other. We are just looking for a guilty all the time. And then we don't reach any kind of goals.
Regarding like trust to journalists as well or to media, I remember a few years ago, the current editor-in-chief of Postimees, I don't remember if he was at that post that time already or not, he wrote a column where he said that no one is afraid of journalists anymore. And then that caused a little bit of debate that do people need to be afraid of journalists or who would need to be afraid of journalists? But now I can see that his point was that like no matter what journalism media writes or publishes, that it doesn't change anything because the parties don't care, the politicians don't care, they just continue and go on. But now the last few years I've seen that actually they do care. Of course they will always be attacking and accusing media of unprofessional and being too general and not going deep enough and not having historic memory. But that comes with our job as well. And that's to some level it's quite normal. But I think that they actually do care about what media is doing. They feel that public criticism is a driver for change and then for impact.
For the last question, I would like to mention the most recent Baltic Media Health Check for 2022 and 2023, which is a regular journalistic study that analyzes trends, finances, and issues of importance in Baltic media markets. And the heading of this recent health check was, will there be a calm after recent storms? Do you feel that there is a calm already?
I don't think that in our profession in the nearest 10 or 15 or 20 years will be a calm. We will need to be all the time in this startup mode, especially because technologies are changing, because the global geopolitical situation is changing. So you are changing all the time. So we will need to think about new ways. We will need to think how to reach people, how to create their trust or recreate their trust. I don't think that there will be times when I started journalism in newspaper D and I knew just could come and there will be this annual conference and we are prizing how good revenues we have and everyone is reading and you have impact. I think that's long time gone. No one even like dreams about it anymore. But I don't believe there will be kind of calm. In opposite, maybe we need to be afraid of too much calm, which I make a synonym of fatigue, that people don't want to consume anymore at all. We will need to think how to actually get them back.
Yeah, absolutely. Too much calm is not a good thing because that will lead you to a routine and then you will become sloppy and bored, etc. But like regarding the general journalistic like infrastructure in Estonia, right now you might be able to say that it is relatively calm. Of course, there are changes this and that way, but like it's the last years of development have in general turned out to be pretty good. But I think the key issue why we can't feel calm is everything related to AI and all the challenges it will pose to journalism and also our media models. And then that journalism already has a very bad example of missing out on the internet. And now there is a threat of missing out on AI and all the impact and changes it will bring to like everyone's lives. So that's something that shouldn't allow any media manager or editor in Estonia or Latvia to feel calm, but to see that how to come out as a winner in this shift.
Thank you very much for this conversation. The next episode will continue this conversation on how it is to be a journalist in either Latvia or Estonia, but we will talk with communication researchers from data perspective and what researchers in Estonia and Latvia have found out about media audiences and journalists. But yeah, once again, thank you very much for your time.
Okay.
This podcast is recorded at Riga Students University Multimedia Studio and is part of a research project making sense of media, a non-media centric and open-ended approach to the study of media-related experiences and perceptions. It is funded by the RSU Internal and External Consolidation Project.